Three leaders sat down at the same table, she with Trump, she with Putin, and the world asked one question: is the war in Ukraine about to end? That was the wrong question. The answer wasn't in the handshake, or the joint statement, or the length of the motorcade. It was quieter than that. One American negotiating pair, dormant for months, switched back on. That's the detail that gives the game away. If you spend that round of diplomacy scanning the headlines for the word peace, someone handed you the wrong map. Tonight we read the right one, the question the room was actually answering, and the fork it leaves Moscow standing on. Let's be precise. I'm not telling you nobody wants the war to end. I'm telling you that ending it was not what this table was for. Start with the words everyone reached for. Peace track. A peace track sounds like a road that leads to a deal. It isn't, necessarily. A peace track can be a credential, something a politician builds now to spend in an election later. Keep that distinction in your head, because everything tonight runs through it. Here's the tell. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Trump's back-channel negotiators, the pair he uses when he wants movement off the official record, came back into rotation. When that pair lights up, it isn't proof a breakthrough arrived, it's proof someone wants the file managed. Those are not the same thing. So before we go further, one word in the comments. Type peace if you read that round of talks as a step toward ending the war. Type pause if you suspected it was something else. Hold your answer. We'll test it by the end. To see what the table was for, start with the clock on the wall in Washington. If a real peace in Ukraine is coming, it is, for Trump, a 2028 asset, not a 2026 one. A settlement is the kind of trophy you hand to your party's nominee on the way into a presidential year, not the kind you spend the season before the midterms. So watch for the tell, the day Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, or J.D. Vance, the Vice President, the two men most likely to carry the Republican banner into 2028, steps onto the negotiating track in person. That's the signal the finish line is real. Until then, the track is being kept warm, not run. I went back through the sequencing on this twice, because the first read felt too cynical even to me. The second read was worse. It wasn't cynicism, it was just the calendar. And judge this by Trump's own logic, not anyone else's. By the administration's own electoral math, a finish line today is worth less than the same finish line in 2028. Ukraine isn't the issue that decides American ballots, but it's a tile on a larger board the White House does care about, the column marked international assets against the one marked international liabilities. Lord Palmerston, the 19th century British Foreign Secretary, left the line every chancellery still runs on. Nations have no permanent allies, only permanent interests. The interest on this clock is electoral, and an ally's clock doesn't get to set it. A war you can end later is, for the moment, an asset you don't spend. Now cross to the other side of the table, because this is where the real decision lives. There's a rule in how Russia feeds this war, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. New resources are never thrown in under old goals. Doing that would be an admission that the old goals failed. New resources demand new goals. New goals in turn justify the new resources. The two move together, or not at all. We have already watched this happen once. In the autumn of 2022, in a hard moment on the front, Moscow staged so-called referendums and declared, for the first time at the official level, the goal of absorbing the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. That was new goal setting, and it arrived bolted to a new resource, the mobilization of 300,000 men. New goal, new resource, announced together. Exactly the rule. So look at the fork in front of the Kremlin. Branch 1, hold the existing goals and pursue them with the limited resources already in the field. Branch 2, declare new goals and reach for new resources to match. New troops through mobilization, foreign manpower, even North Korean units. And new goals on the map would mean new claims. Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, Sumy. I've watched this kind of pause before, and I read it wrong the first time. Back then, I called it exhaustion. It wasn't. It was arithmetic. When a power like this goes quiet, the quiet is not the end of the story. Alexander Gorchakov, the Russian foreign minister of the 1850s, gave the line for exactly this posture. Russia is not angry, Russia is concentrating. Read the pause for what it is. Not a wind down, a fork being weighed. Escalation is never a mood. It's a decision about matching means to ends. Moscow's choice isn't war or peace, it's which war. Now the hook resolves. If branch 2, escalation, serves almost no one at that table, then the table's real job becomes obvious. It wasn't built to end the war. It was built to stop the war from climbing, to keep it off the next rung of escalation, the rung that suits neither Washington nor Beijing. Diplomats have a flat phrase for this: managing the file. What it means here is keeping Russia on branch 1. That's the actual assignment Witkoff and Kushner carry. Not a peace settlement, a return to old goals, limited resources. Those are not peace terms. They're escalation-control terms wearing a peace track coat. Now the honest counter read because you deserve it. From Moscow's chair, branch 2 isn't reckless, it's rational. If you believe the West's staying power is finite, then escalating to grab more before the clock runs out has its own cold logic. That reading exists, and it isn't stupid. But the evidence still points the other way, toward a managed pause, for one reason: the one player Moscow leans on hardest doesn't want the climb either. Beijing, by every signal that left that room, sent Moscow the same message Washington did. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor, spent a career arguing that Ukraine is the pivot, the hinge on which Russia is either an empire or merely a large country. A Russian reach down the whole Black Sea coast would swing that hinge hard, and that is precisely the move both great powers want frozen in place for opposite reasons. Freeze the pivot, and you freeze the war's ceiling. So here's the second question. If Russia climbs to the next rung, which capital has more to lose? Washington or Beijing? Pick one. Your answer tells you who was really running that table. So pull it together. That was never a peace summit. It was a fork management summit. Peace is the instrument being saved for 2028. Escalation is the risk being contained. Both things are true at once. And that's exactly why the headlines couldn't hold them. Remember the question the room was answering. It was never when does this end. It was does this get bigger? And you don't have to take my read on faith. You can check it. Moscow's branch shows itself in the early summer. June into July, either the goals stay narrow and the resources stay limited, or the language shifts and a new mobilization story begins. Mark the months. We'll come back to them. So tell me which branch you think Moscow takes, and which capital signal you think decides it. That's the whole game in one comment. If this was a useful way to read the room, subscribe and stay for the next conversation. The next one tracks whether the early summer signal showed up. Either way, thanks for the time.